we are in studio with the world-renowned Dr. Damon A. Williams. What's up, brother?
What's good? What's good?
Man, trying to thrive and not just survive in 2020.
I think that's the word for everybody right now. I mean, you can't even believe where we are. It's like 1 week is a month is a quarter of the year, and like 4 months is a full year. Everything is changing so quickly.
Yeah, I just changed all the days of the week on the calendar to just say day. so, so listen, I've been very excited to have you on the podcast for quite a while. Knowing the spaces that you move in and the individuals you interacted with, but more importantly, your story has always been one that has intrigued me, and wanted to get you on the show and allow you to share it with the listeners and give them the business. So why don't we go ahead and start with the fact that you and I are both from the great state of Ohio, and you are from more of the southern part of the state than I am. But tell me a little bit what it was like growing up in Dayton, Ohio, and what your family situation was like, and how do you think that played into who you are today?
I appreciate that, and I always appreciate the Buckeye State. Actually, my story actually begins in Springfield, Ohio. And so, I was from Springfield, Ohio. My mother was pregnant with me at 16. I came into the world at 17 and, lived at home with my grandparents. And, in Springfield, lived at home with my grandparents. And my biological father wasn't in my life, very much. I think I saw him maybe 4 times in my life. And that's where my story begins in a 600 square foot house. Living with my pawpaw, my granny, and my mother, and also a couple of my mother's older siblings were still there because she was still so young, and and went from Springfield, Ohio, to ultimately we moved to Dayton, and my mother married a man. He became my dad, Steve Williams, and it was a complicated relationship. He loved me greatly, but it was a complicated relationship, and we lived in the city, and the Dayton economy at that time, really flowed from the Detroit economy. It was referred to as the Little D, and all that came with the major metropolis and the small metropolis were the same, really, in terms of the economy being situated on the automotive industry, and also too all the social ills and challenges, of the urban environment. And so, as the economy crumbled in Detroit, the economy crumbled ultimately in Dayton. But during the time that I was there, it was when in the urban environment in the inner city, it's when drugs really began to move into all the neighborhoods. And I can remember my neighborhood eroding. And I can say we lived in the hood, and we say if there was the ghetto, it was like these two T's, and our house was right there in the middle, right? So it was a crack house on this corner, crack house on that corner, but a lot of love in the middle. And and in the neighborhood was a ton of kids, and I can remember being out and just playing in the neighborhood, and you start becoming competitive, right, based on just playing street ball, and and just being in the community. And I was that kid. I was that little rockhead kid running around. I was on my bike all the time, moving in different spaces. And I can remember when people in my neighborhood started getting really involved with, drugs, getting involved with the criminal element, getting involved with the shadow economy, as it were. And, I can remember that being all around me. And those were my boys, and those are the people that we rode with and hung with. And at first it was small, and then over the time it was getting more and more major. And you knew you didn't want to get in certain cars at certain times of days and go into certain environments, even though when they came back home, that's my homie I've been knowing since I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade and lived across the street from me. And for me, life changed dramatically when I was 15 years old, and had a chance to go off to boarding school, and still was in Ohio, but moved from southern Ohio in Dayton to northeast Ohio in Hudson, Ohio, at West Reserve Academy, where I went to boarding school. And that was a defining moment in my life, truly, because I went from the inner city, went from the hood, went from the community, all nearly 100% black neighborhood. And, one of the things that people don't talk about enough in terms of, even race relations and what's going on in our country right now with the urban unrest across the country is, we live in hyper segregated communities, right? Meaning black folks go to school and live in communities with black folks. White folks go to school, live in communities with white folks. Latinx, Hispanic folks go to school, live in communities with themselves. So we live in this condition in this country of hyper-segregation. So in some ways, the promise of desegregation, the promise of, integration and integrating neighborhoods and communities is never, really held true. And in my neighborhood in the 70s and the 80s was all black. And, that same neighborhood today, 30 years later, 40 years later is all black. I mean, so, those things haven't shifted. And all we've seen is just this deepening of intergenerational poverty, deepening of intergenerational challenges. So when I went off to boarding school, coming from that neighborhood in that context, it was truly a different world. And, went into that environment. And it was an elite private school, boarding school. I was one of 8 African-American students at the school. And, you talk about what shapes you. Those are the types of things that shape me. And I could go into that, but I'm going to stop it there and turn it back to you.
Well, that's interesting because the first question that comes to my mind, because I'm from Cleveland, so
okay.
I'm very familiar
with
Hudson and that boarding school, and that prestige is not do it justice, right? In terms of the legacy of that school. So how were you able to get into that school coming from the hood in Southern Ohio?
Yeah, it's an interesting story, and not very many have this particular story. So, I went to the middle schools in Dayton, and my dad, but he had gone to West Reserve Academy himself, and had been in the earlier communities of African Americans, of black folks, who integrated the school in the 70s. So, West Reserve Academy is, one of the top 20, top 30 independent schools in the country, the 26th oldest secondary school in the nation, started on the campus of West Reserve Academy, and Case Western Reserve, the university, ultimately spun off of the high school. So the high school was first. And my father had integrated that school. So here I was going to that school, and I was the first second generation African American ever to attend. And my dad had gone there and was a part of the early group in the 70s, which had integrated the environment. And as diversity started to happen on those campuses, just as it was happening on college campuses. And the story of how he got there is actually the story of how I got there. My grandmother, his mother, was an educator herself, Catherine Williams, and multiple generations in our family have gone to college, beginning with my grandma now. And inside of it, she had a master's degree. She was an educator herself at the high school level. And she had a vision for her 2 sons. And her oldest son, my Uncle Mustafa, went off to boarding school, to Brown University. And so he was at Brown, during the time in which Brown was experiencing their first stages of diversity and inclusion and the social unrest of the time, and he was a witness and a part of that history. And so he went there, and he came home and told his mom, he said, "Mom, the kids that are doing the best at Brown, all of those kids went to boarding school." And so he started talking to my grandmother about boarding school as a possibility and the type of leg up it gave him in preparation. And, you start thinking about inequity of outcomes, right? Well, inequity of outcomes are rooted in equity of schools and inequity of environments and inequity of resources that individuals have to prepare them on their journey. And so these young people who went to these elite boarding schools had this leg up. So that was kind of how I was introduced to my grandmother, how my dad, who raised me, ended up, ultimately going into that environment. And then years later, here I was, the first, second generation, going that same direction.
And so I've heard you tell a story about when you got there, you weren't necessarily doing well, and there was a moment that kind of changed your direction once you got there. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes. I was far from the top student when I got to WRA. Now, where I came from, my middle school, my elementary school, I was amongst the very finest students that they had, and in going to WRA, I had solid, strong grades. I had some pretty good test scores. But once I got into that environment, I was used to being in an environment where I was amongst the top students, probably the top 2 or 3 in any class I was in. Classes of 25, or so persons in a class. Not much discussion between you and the teacher. Definitely not any group discussion. Not a lot of individualized attention if you had challenges. But I was killing it. And I went up in there and thought, I was really, really amongst the very best. I thought I was the man. And needless to say, the level of the curriculum shifted. The expectations shifted. And I went from doing very well to failing Latin, chemistry, and geometry. And the question was, very early on for me, was I good enough to be there? Was I talented enough to be there? And it was complicated by race, place, and economic background. So here I was coming from a more working class background, and here I was coming from the inner city, the hood, all black neighborhood, and here I am in school with the sons and daughters of some of the most, financially solvent families and economically elite in the nation. I tell folks all the time, you pulled up to get dropped off, and we're in our station wagon with the big old cargo thing on the top of it, and everything I own in my life, I'm coming getting dropped off, and this kid's getting dropped off in, these cars with fancy symbols on them. I didn't know what it was, It was a Mercedes. Mm-hmm. This kid's getting dropped off with a big cat on the hood. I thought it was some kind of special cougar or something, Lincoln Mercury. It was a Jaguar, I remember, there was a kid who would at times commute back and forth to school with a helicopter, his dad's helicopter. So you're coming into that environment where persons where they're bragging, talking about, yeah, my dad created this ear procedure, and now he makes X million dollars a year, and every time somebody uses this piece of equipment, so people are telling you stories like that. You sitting there like, man, I hope I got some money for some pizza on Saturday. Right. So it's a whole different expectation, and when you complicate that with not immediately being able to succeed academically, that imposter syndrome starts to settle in, and that sense of you're not good enough and you can't do and you're not capable to compete at that level, and that's when I think it's really important for folks to start developing the skills of grit and resilience, right? And for me, that's where it began, because I got hit in the mouth, and I think it was Holyfield said, everybody got a plan until you get hit in the mouth. Exactly. Right? And then it becomes about not just your plan, but what do you have in the tank to draw upon, to have reserves to call upon to overcome the challenges that you're facing. And, for me, I didn't have that when I got there. But, I met individuals who laid the foundation for everything I've accomplished. So, anything I've accomplished in my life, I go back to the love of my family. I go back to the grace of God for keeping me sheltered in very difficult moments. And I go to this foundation here and the persons that I encountered, because they taught me what this piece of, what life is all about. And I'll tell one quick story. I was failing everything. And an individual came to me named Frank Longstreth, and 6'5", snowy haired white man. And to that point in my life, I never had a conversation with someone who was of a different race and ethnicity to me. I can't remember any teachers. I definitely don't remember any advisors or counselors or anybody. So here I was, I'm 15 years old, 16 years old, never had a conversation with somebody different of a race ethnicity than me. And that's the same thing many of our black college students have when they go to college today. Still haven't had that difference of experience, that intimate type of interaction and contact. And so he comes to me and he says, Williams, I understand you're struggling with some things. And I was embarrassed, didn't know kind of what to say, how to say, what to do. But he created a pathway where he allowed me to say I needed help without losing my dignity. And, and I appreciate that in him greatly. And in essence, what he told me was, look, you're smart, or if you wouldn't be here. He said, but what you need help with is understanding how to overcome a problem when it confronts you. He said, I can help you with that. And basically what he said was, And every night at my boarding school, from 6 o'clock on to lights out, you had to either be in your room, in mandatory study hall, in the library, or working with a professor. And so in this instance, he, as the professor, and all the professors lived on campus, he said, I want you to come to my home, and I'm going to tutor you, and my wife is going to tutor you every evening. He was like, but this is the deal. You can't come when you're struggling with something. You can't come when you just have a test coming up. He said, you got to come every day. And so we had classes 6 days a week, shirt and tie mandatory, 6 days a week. So he was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. He got Saturday off. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. So that's what I did for 3 years. And I tell you what, Troy, it was the foundation of what taught me how to really put my nose to the grind and really start chipping away at something. Grit is defined as a function of long-term goals that you are pursuing over time, overcoming obstacles, right? So grit is defined as a concept of goals, time, and overcoming challenge. That's when I first started understanding what it took to be gritty. And I'm of the belief that our minds work automatically in many ways, meaning that we don't have to think about things to be able to do things, right? So, if a ball's coming towards your head, you don't have to think, I better, move, or something's coming to your eyes. You don't think, I better blink. So there's unconscious ways that we respond to information. We respond to situations. And I believe that those who achieve the highest levels of greatness and impact in their chosen endeavors, then doing what needs to be done becomes automatic. You don't have to think about it. So for me, putting in the research, putting in the time in scholarship, putting the time in writing and design and thinking about whatever it is I'm doing, I don't have to find work ethic, because I have a perfect work ethic that was born in those first moments with him and the repetition of every day, every day, every day, every day.
And I've heard that story before, and I'm always amazed by it. But the two things that I take away from it the most are, one, someone reached out to help you, which is important in every aspect and endeavor of life. You need someone to reach back and give you some assistance. But then two, you got to respond. And you dug deep and developed your work ethic in that moment in time. And I've seen your work ethic play out over the years, and it's always been interesting to me how it developed. So you leave Western Reserve Academy and you go to Miami University?
Yes. I'm a proud Red Hawk, went on to Miami University, and, in going to Miami, stayed in Ohio. It's a great school. But it was, in some ways it was a similar experience to what I had been in at Western Reserve Academy, and it was still, predominantly, overwhelmingly white. It was still an institution where there weren't many persons who came from where I came from. A lot more than WRA, a lot more than 8 students, but only 300-400 students. And so it had some similar dynamics. And, the transition from WRA to Miami really began to awaken in me a consciousness of mindset, not only in terms of work ethic, but also in terms of a racial identity and a racial consciousness. So I was hyper aware of my racial identity at WRA, obviously, but it wasn't something that I was proactively engaging in terms of social consciousness, in terms of advancing equity and inclusion goals, in terms of wanting to be a catalyst for change. That I wasn't there, obviously, as a high school student. And we look into our communities now, many of our high school students are there. Young people, even earlier in age, are coming into that consciousness, which is partially due to them having access to more information through the internet. Cognitive development, moral development, social development, everything happens faster, a possibility with the centennial generation because of the internet. But in that transition, I'll tell you something, it was the bridge. In my senior year, I wrote my thesis on Malcolm X and the Black Muslims. And that was my senior thesis at WRA. And inside of that experience of writing that thesis, I had set for my goal, I'm going to get the highest score possible and have it memorialized in the library. That was my goal. I didn't quite achieve that goal, but it was very, very well scored as a senior thesis. And every senior was supposed to also give their senior speech. And inevitably, your senior speech would talk about your thesis. It would talk about, your experience on campus. And for me, I was still rather ashamed of where I was from. I had done this fantastic research on Malcolm X and the Black Muslims, and it had sparked a spark of consciousness in me about, why is the world like this? Why do I feel this way, like an outsider in my boarding school? Why are there not more black kids here, who are feeling safe like I'm feeling on a Saturday evening, sitting on the stoop of a milkshake comic book shop, drinking a milkshake? If I'd have been in my neighborhood, my hood, I'd have been hearing guns going off. I'd have been seeing people running up and down the street doing 60, 70 in the neighborhood. It might have been people walking down the street cracked out, and here I was safe. And I start thinking about that, and I start thinking about why and what were those differences, and it scared me, and I was mad, and I was starting to feel a sense of anger to the world, because I was going through that consciousness where you start seeing inequity and start asking the question of why our community and why this is going on, and why am I even feeling what I now have the language to call the unconscious bias, the microaggressions, the micro assaults, the micro inequities, the micro disaffirmations that basically happen every single day and have a negative impact on our consciousness. So that transition was huge. And it was at Miami that I like to say that, Tupac Shakur used to say, thug life hit him like the Holy Ghost. I say issues of black power, social change, issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion hit me like the Holy Ghost. And it was there where I started realizing, this is the type of research I want to do. This is the type of change work I want to do. This is the type of catalyzing work I want to do. And it happened from that senior thesis to my freshman year, and then everything after that was Black World Studies majors, sociology majors, want to be a scholar, go get a PhD, that kind of turbocharged on.
Well, that was a perfect segue, because I was trying to understand, how did you get on the path of eventually wanting to get your PhD? You eventually did that at the University of Michigan, right? I don't even believe I said that.
Go blue, baby. Go blue.
Okay, cause you a cool brother, I'm gonna let you slide on that. Kind of you pulling them Desmond Howards on Ohio and whatnot. But you decided to go on and get your PhD.
Yeah.
And then a lot of your work has been centered on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell me about that transition from Miami to University of Michigan, and how you further crafted your discipline.
There's a persistent theme in my life, and I think you'll find that persistent theme in lots of folks who have achieved, different types of success, particularly success where maybe it's in unique ways. You're going to find these individuals that pop up in their life that played a key role as a sponsor, as a mentor, or as a coach. And so I'm a huge believer that as leaders, we need sponsors, mentors, and coaches in our lives, right? So early on for me, I was so incredibly blessed to have uncles, amazing uncles that even though my biological father wasn't there, my grandfather, my uncles were, I was blessed to have my dad come into my life, who married my mom when I was 5, and is a wonderful man, and an incredible, has incredible character, and he taught me things. And then when I went to boarding school, Frank Longstreth, then I went to Miami, had other faculty members, but there was a key individual who was a peer, who became important to me. And one of the things I tell young people, and just leaders in general, is, you can have some mentors who are, aspirational, maybe you just kind of watch their movements through YouTube or whatever media. You have others that are going to have an intimate relationship with you and maybe be on, a day-to-day contact. There's going to be other mentors that maybe are on a board of advisors, right? So you're making big decisions, you call this person up. And then there's other mentors who maybe are peers, right? And maybe they just done figured something out, or they figured a piece of it out. And I think we don't leverage the peer-to-peer mentor game enough, particularly as black men and as young black people. How we trade information and exchange information, not for a social exchange, or you're going to do something for me, but just giving it to you to help one another and building out a greater knowledge and greater affirmation of what we can all accomplish. For me, it started with a brother named Walter Kimbrough, who is now Dr. Walter Kimbrough. In fact, from Atlanta, Georgia, and he's now the president of Dillard University. And shout out to Walt, also known as Big Brother Crusher. He's an alpha, as am I, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Yes, unsolicited shout out there. But Dr. Walter Kimbrough at the time was just Walt. right? And he was a grad student at Miami, and I was an undergrad, and I met him my freshman year, and he, along with several others, were they were captivating for me as a young black man, because I had never seen young brothers who had it together like that academically. They dressed nice. They were incredible students. They had goals. When I met him, I'm 18, 19 years old. He knew at the time he was doing his master's. I'm gonna write my master's thesis on Black Greeks. I'm gonna write a book on Black Greeks. I'm gonna get a PhD. I'm gonna be VP of Student Affairs. I'm gonna be president of HBCU. He knew that at 22, 23. So one of the things I believe great success is about having clear goals early on. The earlier you can clarify your goals, the more time you have to pursue those goals. And to understand that the goal, once you set it, don't set goals unless you really want to accomplish it. And then once you set it, the plan may differ. The plan may evolve, but the goal doesn't shift. That's when the grit and resilience comes in. But he knew those things, and so it shaped me. And it was from that, early on in that freshman year, I decided I wanted to get a PhD. Didn't know in what quite yet. I knew I wanted to do diversity work, but didn't know at the time I wanted to do organizational change work and diversity strategy work and program development work, change management work. That came a little later when I went to Michigan. And, and the thing one thing I will offer is that, when I was in my master's program, because I stayed from undergrad to master's at Miami and then went to Michigan. It was in the master's program at Michigan that I got hit by the Holy Ghost again. The first time was diversity and inclusion. The second time was organizational change, strategy, structure, processes, people, reward system. I knew I wanted to do diversity work, but at the time I was thinking more be a classic scholar, a sociologist, an anthropologist, a historian. But what I realized was that with those disciplinary areas, while powerful for understanding the issues of poverty, inequity, racism, systemic discrimination, all those things, what they didn't give you was the tools to do something, right? You can analyze the problem, but you needed the tools of policy. You need the tools of legal affairs. You need the tools of understanding legislative dynamics. You need the tools of therapy and counseling, or you needed the tools of change management, right? So these different toolkits to do something with the issues that you've come to understand and can explain. For me, it was the organizational change and the strategic piece. And so I started, I got the diversity piece first, the org piece at Miami second really came in. And then when I went to Michigan, it ultimately became about fusing them together. That I was going to be the person who was trained like a McKinsey consultant from a strategy perspective, from a research perspective, but I was going to bring the analytical lens of, a great sociologist or psychologist, but the issues I was going to work on was going to be diversity and inclusion.
And so you didn't go from Michigan directly to Wisconsin. I know you had some other universities that you stopped along the way. But I do want to fast forward to your time at the University of Wisconsin, because in that time and moment in your life, you are now the Chief Diversity Officer and also Vice Provost as well.
Yeah.
At Wisconsin. And I know you were also, so that gave you a role to be the opportunity to be a mentor to some of the students on campus in the way you were mentored. But you also face some unique challenges that probably are not only popping up in Madison, Wisconsin, but in other towns of the same demographic makeup. Talk to me a little bit about your time there.
Yeah, sure. I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a great institution, go Badgers. And it was during my time there that I was Vice Provost, Associate Chancellor, Chief Diversity Officer, member of the faculty. So I had a broad spanning role and led the third largest diversity and inclusion infrastructure in higher ed. We had about 400 full and part-time staff members in our divisional team, broad spanning area of leadership and great university. And so we were tasked with really leading the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And it was tough. It was tough expanding the pipeline in a more homogenous state, which is Wisconsin. It was tough expanding the pipeline in a world where, the inequities that exist in the state from an educational perspective are tremendous. And it was very difficult moving the climate of inclusion in an environment that was at times progressive on its surface, but was, had challenges with change just like every other institution. And it was tough, and we did great work. I'm very proud of there. We created, the world's first hip hop urban arts scholarship program, and we're giving out millions of dollars of scholarship a year to some of the nation's leading poets and b-boys and b-girls, really cutting against the grain, understanding, this Generation Z centennial generation and, their desire to be creators and social change agents. Things you're seeing now, we knew those things then and start building some programs around it. So very proud of that work. But also, it was in those spaces where I came to understand, what it means to really stand strong in this work, right? It's not all going to be easy. There's going to be times where you're going to be attacked by conservative forces. There's going to be times where maybe national figures are, like happened to me, going to be calling you out of your name on national TV for just standing up doing your job as a diversity officer. And there's going to be times where diversity leaders have to understand that there's these moments of truth where you're going to be aggressed against inside of with your colleagues. They're going to microaggress against you, these everyday insults. They're going to try to invalidate your presence. And you have to understand how you're going to deal with those things. And at the same time, there's going to come moments where you're probably going to have to say what's uncomfortable. Do what's uncomfortable. One of the things we talk about when you're a diversity officer, a really good one, you become the conscience of the organization, good, bad, or indifferent. Now, should you? No. Is that in the job description? No. They put the SVP, Chief Diversity Officer, and must be moral conscience of institution. Absolutely not. But when we peel beneath the layers of, what is the espoused job and then what is the real job, a part of the real job is you have to have the ability to be that conscious. And beyond that, you have to have very strong moral convictions in who you are. Right? You have to know exactly what you stand for, exactly what your why is, exactly where your lines is. And this is one of the things I say to diversity officers all the time, whether I'm coaching, in higher ed or corporate. I tell leaders in this regard, in our training programs and our coaching work, we tell them, look, there's going to come a time probably where you're going to have to leave. Right? There's an expiration to this role of leadership, just like there is for great CEOs, just like there is for great chief marketing officers, just like there are for great presidents. Times and need will necessitate the type of leaders that we need in our organizations. With diversity officers, the issues don't change, unfortunately, fast enough that the issues have changed that we need a new type of diversity officer necessarily. But what does change is your ability to be effective. Because if you're constantly pushing against the grain, and I'm not talking about standing up, arguing in every meeting, that's not pushing against the grain. That's being a rabble-rouser. But I'm talking about if you're pushing a change agenda in terms of strategy and policy and structure and representation and psychology of working with leaders, but you're doing this strategically in the right way, even then you're going to have an expiration date. You're going to need to move on. So I tell diversity officers all the time, they got to be prepared to move on. Had a great experience at Wisconsin. We did phenomenal work. But then it was time for another chapter, and ultimately we moved on to what the next chapter was.
One of the things you have always done, which I think is of paramount importance to people of color, in particular black people who have a positional power, is there's two things that are key ingredients. One, you need to have a budget, right? I believe you have a saying around currency. What was your saying?
Oh, it came from the legendary Frank Hale Jr. of The Ohio State University. He said, he was one of my mentors. He said, commitment without currency is counterfeit.
Exactly.
And don't you let nobody tell you different.
Right. So if you haven't been given the budget,
yeah, right,
then some of the things you're going to be able to do are going to be limited off the bat. But once you have the budget, you have to be willing to use it. Yeah. And what I tend to see, a lot of times you'll see black people in positional power. One, they're not given the budget in the first place. It's a figurehead title in a lot of ways. But if they are given the budget, a lot of times they're scared to use it, right? Because there may be some economic consequence to their own life if they use it in a way that's not satisfactory to the larger status quo, right? I noticed that you've always been good at carving a piece of the budget out for the work that you needed to do. And then two, you always push the envelope to make sure those dollars were being used in some creative and innovative ways. You mentioned the hip hop program at Wisconsin. But talk to me a little bit more about, before we transition into your nonprofit career, about the importance of that budget and willingness to use it.
One of the things I say is not only that commitment without currency is counterfeit, but that diversity plans can't breathe without air, right? Accountability, incentives, infrastructure, and resources. And diversity plans can't breathe without air. There's no commitment without resources. But there also is generally not innovation that happens unless we're willing to take a piece of our money, a piece of our time, and really invest those things into innovation. There's a wonderful framework. We talk about innovation, and innovators have this similar DNA. And, innovators are always questioning their world, right? Why? Why not? What can we do? How are we going to get there? How do we go faster? What's a better product? What's a better process? The second thing about innovators is they understand the real importance of searching and reapplying solutions they see in other places, right? So if you see something working over here, you see if they can pull it over there. The third thing is they're always collaborating strongly with other folks. And then the fourth and fifth thing about innovators is they have an orientation towards experimentation and trying something. And then the fifth thing is once they figure out it works, they scale up and want to go big. For me, I've always tried to embody those characteristics of an innovator and wherever I've gone, and building something that remains as a legacy, right? Everything you build when you're a C-suite, a high-level leader, or even a more entry-level leader is not always going to be enduring. But when you can point consistently, well, I was there for 4 years, here for 5 years, here for 3 years, here for 7 years, and you can point to things that you did, you probably know that you made a true difference. For me, it's important to have a piece of the budget, right? A piece of the resources that you can courageously, creatively use. And diversity officers and executives in general who don't negotiate those types of latitudes and discretionary freedoms to lead generally tend to be the ones that are, more rubber stamping. They tend to be the ones that are just operationally getting things done versus creating the possibility for game-changing jumps. So when we look at the world that we're in now, everything's moving faster, right? Technology, social media, communication, brand building, ideas, research and development, demographic change, political movement, ideological movement. Everything's changing so fast. I mean, and we're in the midst of a global pandemic right now, right? And so in the midst of this, how many of us are now, talking about epidemiology and talking about viral movement and flattening curves and, public health has now jumped into the mainstream of the world. Well, that's spawning all types of new things, right? I don't think I've ever done a search on Amazon and found more opportunities to buy a face covering, right? To buy some different types, sold out for the next 7 weeks, right? Because it's all sold out. So a whole new proliferation of cultural notions are entering our society right now. Now, some of it is, our handshake's going to go away forever because we're wearing gloves, right? And we're physical distancing. Another one is it now going to be something that we always fashionably, like you might put a pocket square on and choose a colorful face covering like I did today, right? Is that the new normal? Is that going to cause a ripple effect culture shift? And then on the other side is the realities of being a black man wearing a mask most of the time. What's the implication of that when we're moving in spaces where we're not the majority but we're the minority, and we know folks have unconscious fears and biases and worries about us, right? And you just trying to go to the gym, right? But because you hitting the gym and it's after dark and you coming in and someone else is coming out and they have an unconscious response to you and clutch their bag, right? Or act like a Karen and pick up the phone and start questioning whether or not, you should be there and what's going on with you, and you just there bird watching. You there walking your dog. Next thing you know, somebody's on the phone being hysterical, but because we masked up in a new environment, so things are shifting and evolving. Leaders have to be able to be innovative and creative, responsive, dynamic, and a part of that is they got to have some resources to pursue what they think needs to be done.
Definitely. So you go from Wisconsin to Atlanta, Georgia, a tremendously different environment, not just geography-wise and demographic-wise, but you've also left higher ed at this point and entered the nonprofit space. Talk to me a little bit about what did you notice was different moving from higher ed to the nonprofit space? What was your role? and that moment in time in your life?
You know, probably one of the most important shifts I've ever had in my career was the movement, as you noted, from higher education to the nonprofit corporate world, and had the honor to go work at Boys and Girls Clubs of America as a senior vice president, chief education officer, and the opportunity to serve America's youth, right? From Appalachia to the rural South to the West Coast to East Coast, you know, urban environments, really gave me a chance to get really up close and to understand, you know, the Centennial generation, Generation Z, understand their hopes, their dreams, their passions, their challenges, understand community and family and what was going on. And that was really, really, I considered a polishing school for my ability to understand all the issues that I had seen from the C-suite of higher ed, but I hadn't seen it from the base and the foundation of our country. And it's so important what's going on in those environments because, you know, as the demographics have shifted, that's where the next generation of leaders is coming from. You know, they are the first generation of minority majority. They're the first generation that's, you know, not going into any closets in terms of their sexuality and the full expression of that sexuality, you know, and they bring a voice of consciousness, and we're seeing that play out in our nation now. And for me to get a chance to do that work at Boys and Girls Clubs was powerful. But it was also powerful to understand the movement from the higher ed sector to the corporate sector. And, you know, it moves so much faster. You know, and one of the things we used to say is, you know, we want to be passionate about the mission, but serious about the business, right? So passionate about change, community enablement, you know, the next generation of young people. But you want to run a great, not charity, but you want to run a great social innovation company, right? A great social impact agency, you know, operating at scale for 4 million young people. And so learned so much about that style of leadership and what was necessary, and doing it in partnership with AT&T, Disney, Toyota, Coca-Cola, you know, the Schwab Foundation, you know, Bank of America, you know, the blue chip companies in our nation, to have a chance to be connected to their corporate and social responsibility efforts, to be building out social innovation initiatives at the time when corporate responsibility was just, I think, starting to hit even a bigger moment than it ever had before. And I think we're going to see a turbocharge on the CSR, corporate social responsibility side, particularly as the conversation around race and race relations and community inequity is evolving. You'll see some lift on the CSR side. You're going to see some lift on the marketing side. The question is what type of lift you're going to see on the equity and inclusion side inside the companies, and that remains to be seen.
Right. So that when you were at Boys and Girls Club of America is when I met you. And one of the things that I remember, because you and I are similar in this situation, is that is when we were having our first child.
Oh,
right?
yes.
And talk to me a little bit about the amount of pressure you're under and the leadership role that you have to deliver, not just from a responsibility to the organization perspective, but the work you're doing needs you to deliver, right? The competing nature of that versus your family and personal time.
Sure. You know, I think leaders across the board, you know, parents across the board understand the duality of identities, right? So, you know, we all have these identities that we carry ourselves, these portfolio of identities. They're referred to as social identities. And it's, you know, I am husband, I am father, I am professional, I am leader, I am scholar, I am aunt, I am uncle, I am athlete, you know, I am spiritual worshiper, whatever it is, right? All these different social identities. I'm brother, I'm sister, social identities that we carry with us, and we're constantly juggling them. And, you know, one of the things that I think is an under-discussed topic is, you know, the challenges of being a really, really good parent, trying to be a really, really good parent and a really, really good and high impact professional, and even a game changing professional or an executive. And this is a burden and a responsibility that women have carried at a high level for, you know, generations, and gotten not nearly enough credit for it. You know, as the first group of women went from working in the home to working and moving into the workplace, and now we see a new generation, you know, that have, to quote Sheryl Sandberg, leaned into all their different identities. And then men trying to be good partners to professional women. How do we continue to evolve in that regard? And then perhaps even men who have, their partner working in the home and they're working in the workplace. How do you manage those different identities? And it's tough. And I tell you, I don't shoot to be good at what I do. I shoot to be in the 99.9 percentile of what I do. And I don't apologize for that. I don't apologize for wanting to be generational in my scholarly contributions, generational in my impact on the world, generational in my mavericking and disrupting what we're seeing in our country. I don't apologize for that. But the individuals that pay the price for that the most are the ones that love you the most, right? So it's my wife, it's my daughter, it's my friends, it's my family, but it's no different than what you saw with, God rest his soul, Kobe Bean Bryant, pursuing the types of things that he was pursuing. Or it's no different than what you see with individuals who are obsessively trying to get something done. You listen to First Lady Obama, talk about the pressures, right, associated with President Obama being able to have the freedom to make the moves that were necessary to get to ultimately what was his destiny, which is change the world. But I would imagine that if you ask, the family, they carry that burden, right? And it's the same thing with any high performance leader or high performance athlete. And so, God thank my wife for what she does on a day-to-day basis to make great things happen in our lives. She's the foundation. Like I say, she's Shaq, I'm Kobe, and my little girl, my daughter, is the light of my life. And I tell you something, Troy, she changed me. I didn't think there was anything that could cause me to let up off the gas a little bit, or that there was any person in the world that not only would I tolerate her interruptions, I would embrace those interruptions as making me a greater person, making me a greater leader, making me a greater scholar, inspiring me. And so, it's always something where I always feel like, when I'm doing the things for family, my work is getting away from me. I mean, I feel that, because I'll put in 12, 18, 20 hours in a day to get the article done, to get the lecture done, to get the research product done, to build, this startup company I'm building right now, to serve America's youth. I will put the time in, and that goes back to this story with WRA. See, greatness is about putting that time in. No one's becoming great at their craft. No one's achieving great outcomes at what they do unless you're willing to put the time in. We have this thing, there's some people out there that have been critical of the grit movement and people talking about grit and resilience. And I'm a huge fan of the work of Angela Duckworth, the professor at Penn, who talks about, grit and work the book Grit. But there's some folks that have been saying, more recently that, well, that's putting all the onus for accomplishing great outcomes on the individual. What about systemic racism? What about institutionalized racism? What about generational inequity? Well, my response is we got to work on that too. We've got to be engaged in intergenerational solutions. We've got to be engaged in redistributive justice. We've got to be engaged in equitable and aggressive outreach efforts to diversify. All those things. That's strategic diversity leadership. Shout out. That's the book I wrote, right? Shout out. That's the book I wrote, right? Strategic diversity leadership. But we also have to doggedly work at whatever it is we're trying to do. And I want to make sure that I say that because I think as we move into this world where we're going to be talking more and more about race and racism and systemic inequity, shout out to Black Lives Matter movement, shout out to the millennials and the Gen Zs that have pushed that movement to the fore. And it's taking on a new evolutionary shape in June of 2020 than what it was, in 19 and 18 and 17 and 16 and 2015 as Black Lives Matter has come into our world. But inside of it, as we're increasing our conversation of the systemic dynamics, and that's the right answer, we also can't lose sight of the need for the dogged work and the grit and resilience. And it's coming together with the both, and I think that makes communities of color in particular be able to move the business, get the business, make the business happen.
So you're at Boys and Girls Club, and one of the things that I remember vividly too, because at this point in time, our friendship has started to grow. I was a big proponent after watching your work of you going out and doing your own thing, right? I was probably more of a proponent of it than you were,
Right.
And I knew you had some hesitancies and maybe some fears. Talk to me about why you were reluctant to go out on your own in the beginning, and then what was that aha moment that said, you know what, I'm gonna bet on myself.
I'm a huge believer in chapters, and in my career, I've embraced different chapters. Moving from one institution to another, moving from one sector to another, but I've always had an entrepreneurial interest, right? So I created my first consulting company, my first entrepreneurial efforts, in my early 20s. Like so many folks, I used to throw parties back in the day, and that was my first taste of entrepreneurial engagement, right? So throwing parties, throwing social events. Shout out to ABCD Productions. Those of you who know, it goes way back. It's a small little part of the story. But also, too, I started my first consulting firm when I was a doctoral student at Wisconsin, at University of Michigan. And in starting that consulting firm, I was 24 years old, 25 years old, and I cut my first $65,000, $70,000 consulting deal. I wasn't even a doctoral candidate. And, one thing led to another. I had some opportunities presented to me. I proposed up. I got a little $5,000 contract. And it was in that quick moment of getting the $5,000 contract, the woman came back to me. She said, well, you know somebody who does program evaluation. I had done a little training. I had just taken a program evaluation course. I said, well, I can do a program evaluation. She said, well, give me a proposal. Did a proposal and ultimately ended up, having this pocket of work. And then from there, really never did, never was there a time where I wasn't consulting, right? So it was always there in terms of, finding ways to take your talent to market. As a doctoral student, I had 3 or 4 jobs. As an undergrad, I had 3 or 4 jobs. So for me, multitasking and multi-channeling revenue was always a part of who I was, but at the same time, I was moving a very traditional pathway, writing books, in the academy, get the PhD, rise up to be an executive, and I was a vice provost, associate chancellor at 34, 33. So I was the youngest in the country at that. I was assistant chancellor at 28. And then, moved into the nonprofit sector, was doing those things. So I had accomplished all of the things really that I wanted to do administratively. And I had a point where, candidly, I didn't want to be inside of an organization where I had a noose around my neck on my creativity. I had a noose around my neck in terms of my identity. I had a noose around my neck in terms of my intensity. And I wanted to see if what I thought I really was. And I wanted to know, could I go out there and make it fly, right? Could I go out there and fly on my own wings to take, my heart, my passion, my grit, my resilience, my belief, my desire to be a change agent, and turn that into a successful entrepreneurial endeavor that I could take care of me and my family, and I could do it on our terms, and we could have the type of impact we wanted to have in the world. And I wanted to be able to move faster and more dynamically. But I also felt the fear that comes with, a mortgage, the fear that comes with a car note, the fear that comes with tuition, the fear that comes with being able to maintain your family in the standards and the custom in which they have found themselves to be. And I'm blessed to be in a couple dynamic where my wife is also a professional, but as a man, as a partner, as a spouse, there's something I have to do inside that, right? And, but I felt like I could. I never forget when I came to my wife and I told her, I was like, look, I'm standing down on that 6-figure opportunity over here. I'm standing down on that presidency over there of some iconic organizations that I had a chance to get in the mix on, and some offers that came through. And she kind of looked at me like, what? You have a chance to be president and do this and do that? And for me, I said, it was in that moment of truth, right? And I believe as leaders, we have these different moments of truth where the world presents you with a question. And the only way you can answer that question is knowing exactly who you are, exactly what you're about, and exactly what you're willing to put into a situation to be successful. That was this situation. I was being posed that question in life. And I told her, I said, I think I want to bet on me. And it was really just that direct that I said, I want to bet on me. I believe. And I had gone down to the basement of my house the day after, I had left Boys and Girls Clubs of America, and I wrote a plan quickly. I believe the greatest ideas can be sketched out in a couple minutes. Now, to really flesh it all out, takes some time and resources and lots of stuff. But I built it quick, and I started working on it the next day. And I haven't stopped working on it since that time. And, we've now worked with everybody from American Airlines to Harvard to, the Brooklyn Nets, FedEx, Berkeley, Cal Poly, Teach for America. We've had a chance to partner with so many different spaces around diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And hopefully we'll continue to be fortunate and continue to have a chance to grow.
And that's with your Leadership Academy, correct?
It's with our Leadership Academy and also our research service. So we do 3 types of things. And the name of our organization is the National Inclusive Excellence Leadership Academy, the Center for Strategic Diversity Leadership and Social Innovation. But, my Leadership Academy, we refer to as NIXLA. So anybody wants to check it out, NIXLA, we'll pull it right up, NIXLA. But the National Inclusive Excellence Leadership Academy. And we provide, traditional and online diversity, equity, and inclusion training, leadership, professional development. And so, we've been working across the board. And during the pandemic, we actually, did free programs for the nation to help them manage the diversity, equity, and inclusion dynamics of the pandemic. And, we've probably touched about 5,000-6,000 people across the nation. Many of them in roles of leadership in organizations, and we published the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Crisis Strategy Guide for the COVID pandemic. And now with all that's going on with the racial unrest, we've been getting so many calls to get involved around helping companies to open the conversation, have the conversation, institutions really trying to figure out what they're going to do with their strategies now and moving forward. And it's exciting times. And it's been very rewarding to be able to build out something on our own and to continue to take steps every day to make it what we know it can be in the world.
And so I know things have been going well for you as a still relative startup. In
relative startup.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you get past 3 years, you creeping up on that 5-year mark. It's gonna be important at that point in time, and a tremendous milestone that many businesses don't make it to. But how did COVID impact you from a business perspective? And also, since right on the heels of COVID, we've had a resurgence in the Black Lives Matter movement with the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, as well as others for decades and centuries. But that hit right on the tail end of COVID, where I imagine COVID probably had to slow you down, but this moment might be speeding you up. Talk to me a little bit about how this moment in time is affecting your business.
Sure, it's a great question. And, it's one of the things that's important to understand is, shout out to the great epidemiologist, shout out to Dr. Fauci. I was like, who would have thought Dr. Fauci would be the coolest person in the world, We talk about, one of the things I talk about in terms of leadership is positional power and personal power. President Trump has positional power. Dr. Fauci has personal power, right? Founded in his expertise, his character, his time on task. I think all of us have personal power to get things done. But, when the COVID pandemic hit, I'll never forget I was in Detroit working with one of our partner companies there, and I was leaving there to go to Manhattan for some board meetings with an organization we're working with, and everything was starting to shut down. Boom, boom, boom. This is canceling. That is canceling. And my wife was like, I think you need to come home. And I was like, oh, babe, I'll be okay. And that next day, the NBA shut down. I'm going home. I'm packing it in.
Right. NBA called it quits.
Yeah. NBA called it quits. I'm going home. So I got on the plane, came home, and I haven't left since early March in Atlanta, and it's the longest time I've been on the ground for a decade. But one of the things that happened is in 48 hours, we lost about 10 different contracted opportunities. And so for us, that was a major hit in revenue. It was a major hit in, opportunity. and you didn't know if it was canceled forever or if it's delay and postponed. And we were fortunate that we were up in the quarter in terms of what we were forecasting for the year, and so very thankful for that. And also, we had a number of projects that stayed with us, and so they remained committed. And one of the things that we did then to match our partners or our clients that stayed with us is we just doubled down on what we would do to help them manage the moment. And I very quickly knew that there was going to be a major diversity, equity, and inclusion dynamic that was going to need guidance in the midst of the COVID pandemic, right? So whether we're talking about it in terms of the higher morbidity rates of black folks, brown folks, whether we're talking about in terms of basic and human needs and economic vulnerability, whether we're talking about it in terms of crisis readiness and crisis management and crisis communication, or we're talking about it in terms of interpreting epidemiological finding, or even in terms of mental health. And so we quickly realized those things, and my team came to me and, they were like, Doc, what's next? And we had lost all this opportunity. And so we had about 2 weeks where there was nothing going on. The new meetings hadn't started, the Zoom meetings hadn't started. And there was a great book, shout out to Ram Charan, who is often referred to as the world's greatest consultant, business management consultant. Had a chance to meet Mr. Charan years ago at a Capgemini summit that I was speaking at, and he was speaking at, and I had a chance to be at his table, and it was a great honor to have a chance to just engage him and pick his ear. If you haven't checked him out, check out his work, Mr. Ram Charan. And one of the books that he wrote is The Attacker's Advantage. And inside of that book, he talks about this idea that in times of uncertainty, you can turn uncertainty into unforeseen opportunity by attacking that uncertainty. And so my team came to me and was like, Doc, what's next? And I have a mass library, like 4,000 books, and they're all like, in beautiful bookcases. And I went to my library, and sometimes I'll just start scanning the shelves looking for inspiration. I'll pull something off, open it up, and just start thumbing through to find inspiration. And so inside of this, that's exactly what I did. I pulled his book off the shelf, The Attacker's Advantage, turning uncertainty into unforeseen opportunity, and I immediately wrote a plan. And the next day I told my team, this is what we're going to do. We're going to attack. We're going to attack the COVID on our terrain, our ground, and we're going to make our business and our voice relevant, founded in what we do, which is help people, help institutions, help communities, help the vulnerable. And so within 2 weeks, we wrote the the COVID-19 Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Crisis Strategy Guide. 40 pages, about 150 tips, been downloaded now, several thousand times. It's all across the country on institutions' websites, posted it up. So all these companies, all these universities reaching out saying, hey, we appreciate this. We also doubled down and said, we're not just going to come out with the guide, but we're going to really try to help people to manage this this time. And so we created a free webinar series. And the webinar series is connected to my books. One of the chapters in my book is The Cheetah and the Wolf. And I compare institutions' diversity strategy efforts like the cheetah, crisis-based, fast-paced, one-person, single efforts versus the wolf, collective, relentless over time. And so we called the two-part series Becoming the Wolf and Strengthening the Power of the Pack. We had like 2,000 people come. And these weren't just 2,000 individuals. These are 2,000 people with budgets, with departments, with divisions that they were leading primarily across higher education. So we had a chance to really speak into what was going on to help people when they needed help. One of the pieces that we published years ago, which is apropos for thinking about Black Lives Matter, is titled Signal and Noise. And one of the things we knew is that we wanted to be signal in this world, signal during the pandemic and not noise.
Well, I appreciate you stopping by to give us the business on what's going on in your world and what we need to be thinking about to be successful in this new age of responsiveness from these corporations and societies and communities. It's definitely been a pleasure. We'll have to get together and chat again soon.
That sounds like a plan.
All right, appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Give them the business.